Hi, good morning, and welcome back to another edition of Discover History at the Keys History and Discovery Center. I'm Brad Bertelli, and today we will talk a little bit about geographical points of interest in the Florida Keys. Hopefully we'll have better luck with our internet. Last week we talked about Robert the Doll, and it might have been coincidence, might not have been coincidence that our internet service was in and out. Maybe he didn't like me talking about him, I'm not sure, but it's still a great subject, and hopefully we will be glitch-free for the rest of our little chat here on this Tuesday morning. If you have questions, Erin is manning the camera phone, and she'll be happy to relay those to me. If not, I'll be happy to answer them later on in the afternoon if you just post them on our Facebook page there. So, sometimes people ask me where I get, how do I get into the history? How do I research what I'm doing? And this is kind of how we're going to talk today. I'm working on a book about Black Caesar, and as I'm writing about the pirates and about his escapades on Elliott Key, I'm trying to think about how the pirates would have hid their mast behind the island so it wouldn't alert passing ships of the presence of a supposed pirate or some kind of bad ship trying to hide behind an island. And so it got me thinking about elevations and about southernmost and northernmost and where Elliott Key fits into that whole mix of the Florida Keys. And then, as so often happens when I'm writing about history or researching history, one question leads to another question, and then kind of the rabbit hole opens up and down I go. So we'll talk a little bit first about Elliott Key's place along the Florida Keys archipelago. And whereas Key West is thought of as the southernmost point, or the southernmost city is what's celebrated as the southernmost city, which is not really accurate for the U.S. There are a lot of caveats to that story. The southernmost point in the U.S. and all the territories is actually in the Americas Samoas. The southernmost town in the U.S. and its territories is actually in Hawaii. The southernmost town with a population more of 250, so the southernmost city, is actually in San Juan, Puerto Rico. But when we come down to Key West, talking about it being the southernmost city, that is within the confines of the contiguous United States, so of the 48 states that are connected. And when we talked about when you go to Key West and you're in the southernmost city, and then you have to go down to the big concrete buoy to take your picture at the southernmost point, that is not actually the southernmost point on Key West or in the U.S. The 48 states of the U.S. It's part of the contiguous 48 states. On the island itself, the southernmost point is a little piece of island that sticks out called Whitehead Spit, and that is the actual southernmost point of the island of Key West. But in terms of the southernmost island, in the chain, it's actually Ballast Key, which is it's a private island, was privately owned for a long time by David Wachowski, forgive me if I've mispronounced his last name, who passed away a couple years ago and is now part of the National Wildlife Refuge. But it is considered the southernmost island in the Florida Keys. It's about 8 miles away from Key West. Sometimes some charts or some sources say 8 miles, some say 11 miles, so we're talking 8 or 9 miles somewhere in that area. So that's the actual southernmost island of all the islands. The easternmost island is not really an island anymore. It's we talk about a lot of times we talk about the lighthouses, Carysport Lighthouse and Alligator Reef Lighthouse, and then we come down to, in the Marathon area, to Sombrero Lighthouse, and it's actually called Sombrero Key Lighthouse because way back when, and not so much today, but that's actually built on a little spit of land, a little piece of land that kind of used to come and go with the tide. So that was actually built on something called Sombrero Key, which is why the proper name for that lighthouse is Sombrero Key Lighthouse, and that is the easternmost island in the chain. Now, as far as the northernmost island in the chain, sometimes you might consider Key Biscayne because it has that key name in its name. You might consider that, or that might seem like the obvious choice for the northernmost of the Florida Keys. But in actuality, Elliott Key is considered the northernmost island in the Florida Keys. And Elliott Key, of course, was the legendary pirate lair of the most famous pirates who never existed in the Florida Keys, our good friend Black Caesar, who reigned over that island for hundreds of years in at least 3 different times in the 16th century, the 17th century, and the 18th century. Very fascinating story that I'm having a lot of fun working on. But also, going back to how do you hide a mast, a sailboat mast, from these low-lying islands, because the Florida Keys are really low-lying islands, with the average elevation of all the Florida Keys being about 3.2 feet above sea level. Now there are always, there's always islands or parts of islands that are going to be higher and a little bit lower. The highest elevation in the Florida Keys, there are 3 spots that reach this elevation of 18 feet above sea level, and one of those is in Key West on what's called Solaris Hill, and that is where the Key West Cemetery is today. It wasn't always on Solaris Hill. It was closer. It was actually kind of on the beach, and then when a hurricane came back in the 1800s and kind of uncovered all the caskets and washed them all away, so there were caskets and bodies floating around, they decided to move the cemetery to a higher point. They chose the highest point on the island, and that is Solaris Hill, kind of where the cemetery is today, which if you're in Key West, and that's a great little historic tour to walk through the graveyard, and there's lots of great names and some interesting tidbits found in that cemetery, so it's a great place to stop if you're looking for a little something unusual to do on the island when you're down there. Now there are a couple other places in the Florida Keys, both located in the upper Keys, that have elevations that also equal 18 feet. And one of them is on Ligne Vita Key, which is today a state park. It's Ligne Vita Key Botanical State Park. It's a beautiful island. It's with one of the very few, if not the only, natural hammocks still left in the Florida Keys. So it's but it also has some higher points, and one of those points is 18 feet. Now that island is only accessible by boat or by kayak, and you can't just show up on the island. You really have to, in order to explore the island, you have to be accompanied by a ranger who does great historical. They do great historical tours out there. I'm not sure if that tour actually leads out to that highest point, but it is on Ligne Vita Key. But also the much more accessible Ligne Key also reaches an altitude, which is a fancy word. Like you really can't call it altitude here on the Florida Keys, but it also reaches the height of elevation of 18 feet above sea level, also at Ligne Key, which also happens to be another state park. Ligne Key Fossil Reef Geological State Park. I'm pretty sure I get it wrong every time, but that's another great place to go and visit and explore some of our great local history. Aaron and I did a Discovery History there probably about I want to say a year ago. I lose track of time, but it's a great place to go and see just what a thin layer of land there is on the Florida Keys. Of course, this was all once upon a time a fossilized, a thriving coral reef that is now we all walk over this fossilized coral reef. And so at Ligne Key, we also reach an elevation of 18 feet. I'd highly recommend going there as well. You can take a ranger tour through the state park and see some of the exposed quarry walls, and that was where they were quarrying rock for for Flagler's Railroad in the early 1900s, and again during the construction of the Overseas Highway in the 1920s. But also that was an active quarry up until at least through the 60s. I can't remember when it closed down, but that was where Keystone was harvested or was quarried. And some great examples of Keystone would be the Key West Courthouse, the Florida Keys Memorial, also known as the Hurricane Monument. Another great example of that beautiful Keystone, that quarried coral rock that is shipped up up to Miami and kind of cut thin and polished to really bring out the coral segments, and it's a very pretty decorative coral rock. But once we get back down to Elliott Key, it turns out Elliott Key is below average in terms of elevation, whereas there are a number of places that are high with 18 feet, and the average of average elevation is 3.2 feet. When we get to Elliott Key, it's only 3 feet above sea level. And Erin wants to raise her hand. I think someone has a question.
We had a question, is there a ranger station on Ligne Vita Key, or do you have to pre-book a tour?
There is not really a ranger station, but there are rangers who live out on the island. I believe they have scheduled tours. I'm guessing on the days. I think it's Wednesday through Sunday. I'm not positive on that. And I'm also guessing like 11 and 2 or 10 and 1. But that information can be found through the State Parks website. As a recent volunteer and a new board member for the Friends of the Isla State Parks, I should know this off the top of my head, but I do not. But there are regularly scheduled park ranger tours of the island. Really recommend them. It's really amazing place. You get to go up inside the Matheson House as well. So that kind of wraps up our little chat about elevations and southernmost points and northernmost points and easternmost points. And if you have more questions, feel free to type them in. We don't have any lectures coming up this week. In a week from Wednesday, we do have our good friend Dr. Corey Convertito coming up from Key West to give a presentation on the history of tourism, which she always does a great job, so we're looking forward to having her back. And in the meantime, you guys have a great week. Visit back to our Facebook page. Also see us on Twitter and on Instagram. Always a bunch of great pictures, a bunch of great information, because there's so many stories to tell and so much great history here in the Florida Keys. And that's why we're here, and that's why we love doing what we do. Thanks so much. Have a great week.